Sophia Jones stood in the crowded subway station, her heart pounding as she clutched her worn leather bag tightly. The rhythmic clatter of trains echoed in the dimly lit space, but Sophia's mind was elsewhere, racing through the events of the last 24 hours. A chance encounter with a stranger had turned her world upside down, pulling her into a web of secrets she couldn't untangle. She glanced over her shoulder, scanning the sea of faces behind her. Was someone following her? It felt like every shadow held a pair of eyes, watching her every move. Her breathing quickened as she replayed the conversation she had overheard, a whispered exchange that wasn't meant for her ears, one that hinted at something far bigger than she had imagined. The sound of her phone buzzing jolted her from her thoughts. She fumbled to answer, her hands trembling. "Hello," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. A deep, unfamiliar voice came through. "You shouldn't have gotten involved, Sophia." The line went dead. Sophia froze, her grip tightening on her phone. How did they know her name? And more importantly, how much did they know about what she had discovered? She swallowed hard, her instincts screaming at her to leave the station, to disappear into the city before it was too late. But a flicker of determination sparked within her. Whoever these people were, they underestimated her resolve. As the train pulled into the station, its brakes screeching loudly, Sophia stepped forward, her decision made. She was going to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Little did she know, the moment she boarded that train, there would be no turning back. Sophia stepped onto the train, her mind spinning as she quickly scanned the car for an empty seat. The dim fluorescent lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the tired faces of the passengers. She slid into a corner seat, pulling her bag onto her lap and wrapping her arms around it, as if it could shield her from the weight of the unknown. Her thoughts replayed the chilling voice on the phone. Who were they? How did they know her? She could feel her pulse in her ears, but she forced herself to stay calm. The train lurched forward, and Sophia's eyes darted to the window. The dark tunnel outside mirrored her confusion and fear. She tried to piece everything together, but there were too many missing parts. Yesterday had started like any other. Work, errands, a quick coffee at her favorite corner cafe. Then, in a moment of coincidence, or perhaps fate, she had chosen the table next to two strangers having a hushed conversation. Their words seemed harmless at first, but a name had caught her attention. A name she recognized. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but something about their tone had pulled her in. They spoke about deadlines, risks, and someone who knew too much. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she leaned in, pretending to scroll through her phone. That's when she heard it, the detail that made her blood run cold. A location. Her neighborhood. Now, sitting on the train, Sophia pulled her phone from her bag, her fingers hovering over the screen. Should she call the police? A friend? Her instincts told her this was bigger than what it seemed. Her fingers tightened around her phone as she looked around the train car. A man in a dark hoodie, sitting a few rows away, seemed too interested in her. Was it paranoia? Or was she really being watched? As the train rocked forward, she thought of her small apartment and the safety it once offered. But safety felt like a distant memory now. She glanced at her reflection in the window, trying to appear calm, but her eyes betrayed her. If she had been dragged into something dangerous, she needed answers. And fast. The train slowed as it neared the next station, the doors hissing open. Sophia froze as the man in the hoodie stood up, his gaze lingering on her for a moment too long before stepping off the train. Her stomach churned as she watched him disappear into the crowd. Had she just imagined it? Or was this only the beginning? Sophia stared at the empty doorway as the train pulled away from the station, her mind racing with unanswered questions. The man in the hoodie had been watching her. She was sure of it. But why? Was he connected to the voice on the phone? Or was she letting fear blur reality? She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. There had to be a logical explanation, but logic felt distant now, swallowed by the unease settling deep in her chest. The train rumbled onward, and Sophia's thoughts returned to the conversation she overheard at the café. The name they mentioned, the location. It was all too close to home. Could it be a coincidence? She had tried to convince herself of that earlier, but the phone call shattered any illusions of safety. Whoever these people were, they knew she had overheard them, and they weren't going to let it slide. The train slowed as it approached a stop, and Sophia quickly gathered her bag, her senses heightened. The platform was dimly lit, and the few people milling about didn't seem threatening, but she still felt exposed. She kept her head down and moved quickly toward the exit, her heart pounding in her ears. Outside, the crisp night air bit at her face, and she pulled her coat tighter as she walked toward her apartment. Every sound, footsteps, rustling leaves, distant voices, felt amplified, feeding her growing paranoia. As she reached her building, she paused to glance over her shoulder. The street was quiet, almost unnaturally so. She fumbled with her keys, her hands trembling as she unlocked the front door. The moment she stepped inside, she bolted the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling sharply. The familiar surroundings of her apartment offered little comfort. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, even here. Her phone buzzed again, and she jumped, her pulse spiking. The screen displayed an unknown number. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the accept button. With a deep breath, she answered. "Hello." There was a pause, and then a voice, different from before but equally unsettling. "Sophia, we need to talk. You're in over your head, and you don't even know it yet." The line went dead before she could respond, leaving her gripping the phone in stunned silence. Sophia's mind raced. This wasn't just about what she overheard. There was something bigger at play, something that went far beyond her. She sat down, her fingers moving instinctively to search her contacts. She needed help, but who could she trust? The sense of isolation was suffocating, but one thing was clear. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to stop. And neither was she. Sophia sat frozen, the echo of the call ringing in her mind. Her instincts told her this wasn't just a random threat. It was a warning. Whoever had called her knew more about her situation than she did. Her fingers hovered over her phone, and then, without thinking, she dialed the only person she could trust. "Ethan," she whispered when the call connected, her voice barely steady. "I need your help." Ethan had been her closest friend since college, a steady presence in her life even when everything else seemed uncertain. There was a moment of silence on his end, and then his voice came through, calm but concerned. "Sophia, what's going on?" "I don't have time to explain everything," she said, glancing nervously toward the windows. "But I think I've gotten myself into something dangerous. Can you meet me at the old library downtown?" "Give me 20 minutes," he replied, his tone sharp now, a hint of urgency in his voice. Sophia ended the call and grabbed her coat, her mind a storm of fear and determination. The old library was a place they had always met in moments of crisis. It was quiet, tucked away from the main streets, and for now it felt like her only safe option. She stepped out into the cold night, her breath forming small clouds in the air as she hurried down the empty sidewalk. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound magnified. Her pace quickened as she turned corner after corner, each step taking her closer to the library, and she hoped answers. As she neared the building, its towering stone facade loomed in the moonlight. She paused at the steps, her eyes scanning the street behind her. Nothing seemed out of place, but the unease in her chest wouldn't subside. Inside, the library was eerily quiet. Rows of darkened shelves stretched into the distance, their shadows creating shapes that danced in the flickering light. Sophia moved toward the back, her footsteps muffled by the worn carpet. Ethan arrived a few minutes later, his face a mix of worry and confusion. "Sophia, talk to me," he said, pulling her into a quiet corner. Before she could respond, the sound of the front door creaking open echoed through the library. Both of them froze, their eyes meeting in silent agreement. Someone was here. Sophia's heart raced as the sound of deliberate footsteps grew louder, each one closer than the last. She backed into the shadows with Ethan, clutching his arm as they tried to stay out of sight. A figure appeared at the end of the aisle, tall and cloaked in darkness. They paused, scanning the room as if searching for something, or someone. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She knew whoever they weren't here by accident. The figure moved closer, their steps slow and deliberate, the tension in the air unbearable. Sophia felt Ethan squeeze her arm, a silent signal to stay calm. But every instinct in her body screamed to run. As the figure drew nearer, Sophia's mind raced with possibilities. Were they here to warn her, to silence her, or to pull her even deeper into the mystery she was already entangled in? The answer was coming, but it wasn't one she was ready to face. The figure stopped just a few feet from where Sophia and Ethan were hiding, their shadows stretching across the floor like a dark omen. Sophia held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give them away. Ethan motioned for her to stay still, but the tension in her body made every muscle scream to move. The figure turned their head slowly, scanning the dimly lit shelves. Then, almost as if they sensed something, they reached into their coat pocket. Sophia's stomach dropped as she saw the glint of metal in the faint light. Panic surged through her, but before she could react, the figure spoke in a low, deliberate voice. "Sophia Jones, I know you're here. You need to hear this." The voice wasn't cold or threatening. It was calm, almost urgent, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. How did they know her name? And what could they possibly have to say? Ethan moved first, stepping forward with his hands raised. "Who are you, and what do you want?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the tension in his posture. The figure didn't flinch, their eyes locking on Sophia as she reluctantly stepped out of the shadows. "I don't know what you think I've done," she said, her voice trembling, "but I'm not going anywhere until you explain what's going on." The figure sighed, lowering the object in their hand. It wasn't a weapon. It was a small, battered notebook. "This isn't what you think," they said, stepping closer. "But you've stumbled into something dangerous, and if you don't listen to me, it's only going to get worse." They held out the notebook, their expression serious. "Everything you overheard, it wasn't an accident. You were meant to hear it." Sophia stared at the notebook, her mind racing. Meant to hear it? None of this made sense. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the worn cover. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure's jaw tightened. "Because you're connected to someone who's at the center of all this. And whether you realize it or not, they're using you." Before she could ask more, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the library, cutting through the tense silence like a blade. Sophia whipped around to see another figure climbing through a broken window at the far end of the room. Unlike the first, this one moved with clear intent, their steps heavy and aggressive. "They found us," the first figure muttered, their calm demeanor cracking for the first time. They grabbed Sophia's arm, pulling her toward the nearest exit. "We have to go. Now." Ethan followed without hesitation, his face pale but determined. Sophia's mind was spinning as they sprinted through the darkened halls, the notebook clutched tightly in her hand. Who was chasing them? And why did it feel like she was being pulled deeper into a conspiracy she couldn't escape? As they burst out into the cold night air, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was only just beginning. And whoever these people were, they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. The icy wind stung Sophia's face as they ran down the deserted street, the sound of heavy footsteps closing in behind them. The stranger tightened their grip on her arm, guiding her toward an alleyway. Ethan followed close, his breaths coming in sharp gasps. "We can't outrun them forever," he said, glancing back at the shadowy figures pursuing them. The stranger stopped abruptly, turning to face Sophia. "There's no time to explain, but you need to trust me. That notebook holds the key to everything." Sophia clutched it tightly, her mind torn between fear and the need for answers. "What's in it?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Evidence," the stranger said. "Proof of everything they've done. And it's connected to someone you know. Your boss, Daniel Harper." Sophia's breath caught. Daniel, the kind and unassuming man who had mentored her for years? It didn't seem possible. Before she could process the revelation, their pursuers emerged from the shadows, blocking the alley's exit. One of them stepped forward, their voice cold and commanding. "Hand it over, and this ends now." The stranger stepped in front of Sophia, their stance protective. "You don't get to silence the truth," they said firmly. Ethan moved to Sophia's side, his expression fierce despite the fear in his eyes. Sophia's hands trembled as she opened the notebook, her eyes scanning the pages. It was all there: transactions, names, even coded messages linking Daniel to an underground network of corruption. The weight of betrayal hit her like a wave, but there was no time to dwell on it. The leader of the group advanced, their patience wearing thin. "You don't know what you're getting into," they growled. "Give it to us, or you'll regret it." Sophia's fear melted into anger as she realized the choice before her. For too long she had been running. But now, holding the truth in her hands, she knew she couldn't back down. With a sudden burst of courage, she stepped forward, her voice steady. "If you want this, you'll have to take it from me." Before the leader could respond, the wail of sirens filled the air. Blue and red lights flashed as police cars screeched to a halt at the alley's entrance. The group froze, their escape cut off. Sophia's heart raced as officers stormed in, shouting orders. The stranger turned to her, a hint of a smile breaking through their tension. "I called them. I told you. I'm on your side." As the pursuers were handcuffed and led away, Sophia felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. But something still didn't sit right. She turned to the stranger, her voice wary. "Why did you help me? What's your stake in this?" The stranger hesitated, their expression unreadable. "Let's just say we have a mutual enemy, and now that you've exposed them, my work is done." Without another word, they disappeared into the night, leaving Sophia with more questions than answers. As the chaos settled, Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said. Sophia nodded, though her mind remained heavy with the truth she had uncovered. Daniel's betrayal, the danger she had faced, it wasn't something she would forget. But as she handed the notebook to the authorities, she knew one thing for certain. The story wasn't over. Not yet. And this time, she would make sure the truth came to light. Sophia stood under the flickering street lamp, watching the police cars disappear into the distance. The notebook was no longer in her hands, but its weight lingered in her chest. She glanced at Ethan, who offered her a small, reassuring smile, though his face showed signs of the same exhaustion she felt. The stranger's sudden departure still gnawed at her thoughts. Their cryptic words had left too many loose ends, and while the immediate danger was gone, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their involvement. But for now she was safe, and that was enough. The next morning, Sophia sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. Her phone buzzed with notifications, news alerts, calls from reporters, even a voicemail from her boss, Daniel Harper. The revelations from the notebook had made headlines overnight, exposing a network of corruption that spanned beyond anything Sophia could have imagined. Daniel's involvement was no longer a secret, and the authorities had already launched an investigation into his actions. Sophia listened to the voicemail, her stomach tightening at the sound of Daniel's voice. "Sophia," he began, his tone desperate, "I need you to understand. I had no choice. Please, call me back." She deleted the message without hesitation. Whatever excuses he had, she didn't need to hear them. Later that day, Ethan dropped by, bringing a sense of normalcy that Sophia desperately needed. They sat in the living room, the late afternoon sun casting warm rays across the floor. "So, what happens now?" Ethan asked, his voice careful but curious. Sophia leaned back, a small, weary smile tugging at her lips. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I can't go back to the way things were. I've seen too much. I need to figure out what to do with it." Ethan nodded, understanding. "You've got something a lot of people don't: courage. Whatever you decide, you'll handle it." As evening fell, Sophia stepped out onto her balcony, the city buzzing below. For the first time in days, she felt a strange sense of peace. The danger was behind her, but the lessons it brought were not. She had learned the power of standing up, of seeking the truth, even when it terrified her. She didn't know what the future held, but as she gazed at the horizon, one thing was clear. This was her chance to rebuild, not just her life but the trust she had in herself. The storm had passed, and in its wake, Sophia felt stronger than ever.